In the early days of the 1970s, one of the most bizarre incidents in aviation history occurred in the skies over the United States of America, involving one of the most advanced fighter jets of the era. A routine training exercise dramatically becomes a fight for survival, not just for the pilot, but also for the aircraft. Monday, February 2nd, 1970, in Montana, USA sits the Malmstrom Air Force Base of the United States Air Force. Located approximately 100 miles to the northeast of the state capital of Helena, and right alongside the city of Great Falls in Cascade County, it is the home of the 71st Fighter Interceptor Squadron. In 1970, the 71st operated a fleet of Convair F-106A Delta Dart interceptors, and this particular Monday morning was just a normal day on the squadron. It is the height of the Cold War, and today the squadron are conducting a standard training exercise in air combat manoeuvres, or dogfighting. On the plan is a 2v2 combat scenario out over the plains of Montana, a contest of skill and ego using supersonic interceptors. The four detailed aircrews boarded their respective F-106s and headed for the runway at Malmstrom. Unfortunately, one of the pilots, Larry McBride, suffered a mishap on his way off the ramp. The drag chute on his Delta Dart, used in braking following a landing, deployed unexpectedly, and he was forced to abort his part in the mission. This left only 3 aircrew to conduct a 2-against-1 exercise. Major Tom Curtis as the solo aggressor, who would be up against Major Jimmy Lowe and First Lieutenant Gary Foust. The 3 remaining crews departed Malmstrom and headed east-northeast towards the Hayes Military Operations Area. Upon arriving in the MOA, they were vectored out to a 20-mile separation, whereby they turned towards each other, head-on, although with a 1,000-foot separation for safety. The 3 F-106s would remain under the control of Fighter Control until they passed each other, and then the fight is on. The chasing aggressor would attempt to use all his airmanship and dogfighting skills to gain a valid firing position, and of course, so were the other 2. Major Curtis was wary of the more advanced skills of Major Lowe and thought First Lieutenant Foust would be easier to pick off first. His strategy for victory would involve pushing the Delta Dart right up to the limits of its performance envelope. The Convair F-106 Delta Dart, a single-seat all-weather interceptor aircraft, was designed and manufactured by the American company Convair. Developed in response to the 1954 interceptor program, the F-106 was envisioned as the ultimate interceptor. It evolved from the earlier F-102 Delta Dagger, incorporating several significant improvements. Notably, it housed its air-to-air missiles internally, eliminating the need for external pylons. Entering service in June 1959, the F-106 served as the primary all-weather interceptor for the United States Air Force during much of the Cold War era. Powered by a single Pratt & Whitney J75 P17 turbojet engine, giving it a thrust of 24,500 pounds with afterburner, it could reach a maximum speed of 1,525 miles per hour, that's Mach 2.3, up to a maximum ceiling of 53,000 feet, or just over 16 kilometers. It had a range of 575 miles, or 926 kilometers, on its internal fuel load, or, with its external tanks fitted, this could increase up to 1,800 miles, 2,900 kilometers. Armaments comprised 4 AIM-4 Falcon air-to-air missiles, and it was also nuclear capable, carrying a single 1.5 kiloton Genie air-to-air nuclear missile. The F-106's performance was exemplary for its time, with rapid acceleration, high-altitude flight capabilities, and impressive top speed. As the 3 Delta Darts approached each other head-on, Curtis had the plan of accelerating to a very high speed and, turning vertical, trading that huge amount of energy for altitude, encouraging Foust to follow. Curtis pushed his aircraft throttles to the max, engaged his afterburner, and as he was passing Foust, he was doing Mach 1.9 as he pulled his F-106 vertical. Foust immediately followed, and were soon engaged in a vertical rolling scissor maneuver, essentially barrel rolling around each other as they climbed. Curtis's thinking was that as Foust had considerably less speed entering the climb, he would eventually run out of energy and fall out of the engagement, allowing Curtis to pitch over and get that all-important firing position. As the pair passed through 38,000 feet, Curtis's plan was about to pay off. Recognising that Faust's aircraft was falling back due to lack of energy, he kicked his aircraft into a high G rudder reversal, intending to pull in behind Foust. Foust realised the trick being played and applied the same action to his aircraft. Unfortunately for Foust, his aircraft was right on the edge of stall when he kicked in the rudder input. His aircraft shuddered violently and entered an accelerated stall. His F-106 was rolling uncontrollably as he fought with the controls and attempted his stall recovery procedures. Despite his best efforts, the aircraft entered a flat spin, and from Major Curtis's viewpoint, he described it as spinning very slowly about its pitot tube at the front of the nose. Curtis also had the sickening realisation that in the F-106, a flat spin is usually unrecoverable. In the cockpit of Faust's F-106, he was still going through all his recovery procedures, including hitting the takeoff trim button, which reset the trim on all the control surfaces to a takeoff position, but with no success. To escape the flat spin, he must get the nose lowered to allow airflow to increase over the wings. But he was having no success, and all the while, he was losing altitude. Over the radio, both Curtis and Lowe were offering suggestions, such as deploying the drag chute in an attempt to raise the tail, and in doing so lowering the nose. This he did, but it had no success, the chute only getting tangled around the tail fin. Passing 15,000 feet, the time had come. Despite his best efforts, this Delta Dart was not going to recover. Foust reached for the ejection handle and pulled it. He left the aircraft at 12,000 feet indicated altitude, which was actually around 8,000 feet above the ground, as they were over mountainous terrain. What happened next puts this story down as one of the most bizarre incidents in aviation history. It may have been the violent blast of the ejection seat firing out of the aircraft. It could have been the change in centre of gravity, or perhaps a change in the general aerodynamics due to the ejection. But whatever it was, the Delta Dart's nose lowered, and miraculously, it broke the stall. As part of the stall recovery procedures, Foust had reduced the throttle to idle, and via the takeoff trim button, the aircraft was now trimmed for a nice glide setting of 175 knots in a gentle descent. Despite a slight wobbly roll to the left and to the right, it was in a steady and level flight. The two watching pilots, Curtis and Lowe, as well as Foust hanging from his parachute, looked on in disbelief, with Lowe joking over the radio, Gary, you'd better get back in it." It was thought by all three that the fate of the F-106 would be a fireball as it collided with the ground, and they were so thankful that they were at present over a very sparsely populated area of Montana, and so very little risk to anyone on the ground. Curtis's and Lowe's immediate concerns were for their stricken colleague who was descending into Bear Paw mountain range and would need rescued urgently before he froze to death. Thankfully, he was rescued by a group of locals who brought him down from the mountains on snowmobiles. Attention turned back to the pilotless F-106. It was still in a shallow, gentle descent, but now getting very close to the ground and approaching some farmland near the town of Big Sandy. As it neared the ground, strangely, and seemingly being piloted by an unseen hand, although more likely due to ground effect which aircraft experience as they near the ground, the nose of the aircraft lifted ever so slightly, allowing for the belly of the aircraft to gently touch down onto the snow. The bizarre actions hadn't ended there, however. The idling aircraft skidded along the snow and seemed to be heading straight for a stone wall that enclosed an adjacent field. Incredibly, for some reason, the aircraft suddenly skidded to the right and found a gap in the wall, passing straight through it and into the field, where it came to a stop. The unfolding events were witnessed by the farmer, who immediately telephoned the local sheriff to inform him that an Air Force plane was in his field with his engine still running. When the sheriff arrived at the site, he climbed up onto the wing and peered into the cockpit. Clearly, he could see there was no canopy, no seat, and no pilot. As he stood there, the aircraft, still idling, gently slid forward on the snow another couple of feet. Startled, he jumped off the wing and called for assistance. A call was made to the Malmstrom Air Force Base to inform them of the location, but also to ask how to shut the aircraft down. Engineers at the base advised him to not go in front of the engine air intakes or indeed in front of the nose, as the radar was still sweeping and emitting potentially hazardous levels of radiation. The best course of action the sheriff could take was to keep back the small assembled crowd that had begun to gather and simply allow the aircraft to run out of fuel. Approximately 1 hour and 45 minutes later, the engine, now starved of fuel, wound down. A team of engineers were dispatched from Malmstrom Air Force Base to come and inspect the plane, and they were amazed to discover that the Delta Dart had suffered very little damage in its landing. But for a large gash on the underside panelling, it was intact and in good condition. A team from Sacramento Air Logistics Center at McClellan Air Force Base in California arrived to begin the recovery. The wings were disassembled and it was placed on a railroad flat car, and on the 9th of March, a little over a month since the incident, it was taken back to California. There, it was fully repaired and indeed had a full avionics upgrade before returning to active service with the 84th Fighter Interceptor Squadron at Hamilton Air Force Base, California on the 5th of January 1972. It would continue to serve with the US Air Force until its eventual retirement from the 49th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, based out of Griffith Air Force Base in New York, where, after a period in storage, it was put on display at the National Museum of the US Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. Thanks very much for watching. Please take a moment to hit the like button and consider subscribing.